Good evening, everyone. I'm Patrick McMahon. I'm the Economic Development Director for the town. Thank you for coming out this evening here at Town Hall. We also have several participants online via Zoom. For the folks online, it is viewable only. The interaction will take place here in the Town Council chambers, but we are recording the session, and feel free to follow up this presentation with any questions or suggestions directed to me and then potentially on to the consultants. So we launched this study of the Day Hill corporate area approximately 6 months ago. We retained the services of Camoin Associates as well as their subconsultants, Colliers Engineering and Design, to conduct this study. What was the impetus of the study? The impetus is the changing market post-pandemic. The pandemic sort of accelerated changes to the commercial office market, and we want to poise Day Hill Road and the corridor for ongoing success from an economic development standpoint and as a community asset. It is a significant source of tax revenue to the town that pays for our various outstanding services that all of our residents or businesses are able to enjoy. And so we want to make sure that we are being proactive, looking at the market, determining where the opportunities for future development lie. And we wanted them to be informed decisions. And that's why we brought on a consultant. So with that, I'm going to pass the baton over to my friends at Camoin Associates, Tom Duretzky and Kristen Font.
Thank you, Patrick. Thanks, everyone, for coming this evening. Before we get started in talking about the Day Hill corridor, we just wanted to kind of orient everyone. So those in the room have maps in front of you, and just wanted to kind of walk you through the study area so we know what we're looking at. So this map, we just have some of the main roads highlighted. You can see the red is the Day Hill Road, goes right through the corridor. Then over to the western edge, we have Blue Hills Avenue, Goodwin Drive in the middle, going north and south, Marshall Phelps Road, and then across the bottom, Bloomfield Avenue. So that's just kind of the traffic infrastructure that's within the corridor. And then some of the main properties in the corridor. So on the west side, we have Waterside Crossing, which are the big green buildings, which are personally my favorite buildings. They're so cool because they're green. The Hartford is kind of moving in a little bit near Day Hill Road. Then moving further east, we've got Great Pond. The Amazon Fulfillment Center is the large white building kind of in the middle and the bottom there. Sliding over to the east side, we have the hotels just south of where Day Hill Road exits the study area. Targeting Center is the little kind of island near Bloomfield Ave that you see. Everybody have kind of a sense of what we're looking at now with the study area? All right. Oh, and then of course, Voya is at the top near where Marshall Phelps Road is. So this study was a process that we've been going through over the last 6 months. It started with a real estate market opportunities analysis, which is any real estate analysis is a look at supply and demand, how much real estate supply is out there, what's vacant, where's the potential, and what's the demand in the market for industrial, residential, retail, housing. We looked at all the different types of potential development uses. We also did some fiscal modeling to understand where, you know, if a private investor came in and wanted to do a project, can they get their return on investment? How big is the fund get? Those types of analyses. We also did quite a bit of stakeholder engagement, which many of you were involved in. So we engaged the public. We had a public open house. We also did an online survey to allow the community to weigh in. In addition to that, we spoke with property owners, developers, regional and state economic development folks. We talked to the utilities. We did quite a bit of stakeholder engagement to get a sense of not only what the data is telling us, but validating what's happening on the ground, understanding what the investors see when they look at Windsor, and understanding what the community as a whole would like to see. Through that process, we developed some development concepts, or I'm sorry, gotta move some of this here. Development criteria, which is not saying exactly what to do, but giving developers or investors some understanding of the vision for the town and what they would like to see. So we'll talk a little bit about what that looks like tonight. We also focused in on some specific nodes within the Day Hill corridor to be a little bit more specific on what we heard from the public and what we saw in the market, and providing some guidance again on what the community would like to see there, and ideally some recommendations for moving forward, potentially with some looking at zoning or land use regulations. And then some overall guiding principles that relate to the type of development that we would like to see moving forward to position the corridor for success in the future. So I'll send it over to Tom to talk about some of the market findings.
Yeah, hi, good evening, everyone. So just to start off, we've got just kind of some basic stats about the Day Hill corridor by the numbers. So it's about 3,300 acres. That makes it about 18% of the total area of the town. Over 15,000 jobs in this district, which is about 60% of all employment in the town. So very significant employment corridor for Windsor. Some stats on real property. So both real property and personal property contribute significantly to the overall grand list for the town of Windsor. Together, those make up 20% of townwide assessed value. So very large driver for revenues in Windsor. In terms of recent development, about 2 million plus square feet of warehouse and distribution space have been added since 2015. I think everyone's well aware of that, as well as 230 residential units built since 2019 in the Great Pond area. By acreage, that's the pie chart here showing 24% industrial, 15% office. That larger portion on the bottom left, that's vacant land. So still a pretty significant amount of acreage that's vacant. And then all other uses beyond those included in the list there make up the remaining 18%. So including things like retail, restaurant, recreation, medical office, kind of a whole variety of different uses in the corridor. Move this over. All right. When we talk about a development potential in the Day Hill area, there's a lot of different ways that additional development can happen. It could be on sites that are currently vacant, so what we call greenfield development, kind of places that are currently fields that could be built. Also, you could have adaptive reuse of existing buildings. Buildings that are currently vacant or not utilized to their full potential could be converted to other uses, or what we call infill development on existing parcels. Maybe there's large parcels with parking lots or unbuilt areas that have development potential. This map is specifically looking at land that is unbuilt, so those kind of greenfield sites. This is a map that Colliers did. The areas in pink represent parcels that are currently completely vacant, and it excludes any areas that are covered by wetlands or steep slopes. So these pink areas are developable, relatively flat, relatively dry parcels. That makes up about 700 acres, or about 20% of the district, still developable at this kind of level of analysis. So bottom line is there's still quite a bit of development potential here, and this doesn't include any redevelopment potential. Here's a look at how the district has changed in terms of assessed value in just 5 years from 2019 to 2024. So just to draw your attention to the pink segments of the pie chart. In 2019, industrial development made up about 27% of total assessed value for Day Hill. And then by 2024, that was up to 37%. At the same time, office has decreased. That's the green sector, 35% in 2019, down to 23% in 2024. So that's a pretty significant change in just 5 years, and shows how uses are really shifting in Day Hill. For those that were at the previous meeting, we talked a lot about the market opportunities. We did our market analysis of all the potential use types in the district. And this was kind of the summary. So I'd just like to remind folks of what those opportunities are. And again, these are kind of the types of development that are likely to occur in the market. There's demand for these uses. It doesn't mean, you know, Day Hill has to build these uses. It just purely, this is what the market is demanding. So high potential for different residential uses, continue to see high demand for warehouses and distribution centers, advanced manufacturing space, industrial space, moderate in kind of the retail, recreation, medical office type categories, and then more limited on traditional office, not a surprise, and life sciences space. So I just wanted to remind folks of those opportunities. And beyond market opportunities, that's one of the things that's important when we're thinking about what the future potential is for the district. Fiscal impacts are also important as we're trying to decide as a community what kinds of uses we want to see more of or less of in the district. And so when we talk about fiscal impacts, this relates to the revenue generated by these uses in terms of tax revenue that goes to the town's coffers compared to expenses for the different uses. So the cost to provide services to these uses, whether that's public safety, public education, different services for residents, various public works, roads, sewer, water, whatever it might be. So these are all the different uses and how they kind of shake out in terms of net fiscal impact. For each of them, we want to compare the revenues, which is essentially how high are these properties assessed typically, both personal and real property value. You can see, for example, data centers is at the top there, very high revenue potential. There's a lot of personal property in data centers, all their servers and equipment. That adds a lot to the town's grant list as an example. The expense column refers to what is that cost to provide services for a typical development. And then when you compare those things, the last column is the net fiscal impact. So you can see those are organized from highest to lowest. And again, these are typical. Every development's different. There's always exceptions, but on average, this is usually what you're looking for. Another component in making decisions around what types of land uses we want to encourage are the employment implications. What does job creation potential look like? So this diagram is showing both the kind of number, the quantity of jobs that different uses typically generate. That's on the vertical axis. So uses toward the top tend to generate more jobs. Uses toward the bottom generate fewer jobs. And then on the horizontal axis, they're showing whether there tend to be higher wage jobs or lower wage jobs. So typically when we're looking at economic development opportunities, we like to see high quantity and quality of jobs. And so, your manufacturing and your flex industrial, that's kind of in the top left corner. So tend to have a lot of jobs in number as well as toward higher to moderate wage jobs. And so these are kind of how these different uses play out. So that's another thing to consider as we're trying to determine what makes sense for the district going forward. So this is a lot to take in. This is a summary slide here with all those different dimensions that we've walked through. So if you just kind of follow me as I go across the top row there, the first column is the different use types that we've been looking at. The second column is market potential. Again, that's how much in demand is this type of use in the marketplace? What are developers and investors likely to want to invest in? The second is that net fiscal impact column, as we looked at previously when we look at revenue versus costs for the town. How do those different uses rank? Next is job creation potential, followed by typical wages, which we just talked about as well. And then that last column is what we call community preference. This is based on the public engagement that we've done throughout the course of this project. At past meetings, we had activities and questions and surveys for folks to answer around the types of uses that they'd like to see in the district. This is kind of our assessment of the results of that engagement activity. So this is a tool, it's kind of a framework that the town can use to make decisions about what uses to encourage. Not every use checks every box. In fact, none of them check every box, right? No use is perfect. They all have different advantages and disadvantages. And so when we're thinking about these things, it's important to keep in mind, how some of these things rate. For some people, community preference might be the most important thing. For others, net fiscal impact is important because they want to keep their taxes low. So there's all kinds of considerations here, but it's a useful way to think about these different types of uses. All right, I will turn it back to Krista now to take us through our guiding principles.
So based on the market analysis and all of the research analysis that Tom discussed, as well as the community engagement and conversations with the town, we put together a series of guiding principles. So the things that you see here are just kind of statements of what, again, we would like to see when thinking about future development throughout the corridor. So these are kind of area-wide principles, and then we have some additional principles that are focused on different areas of the study area. So I'll just walk through these. The first one, and I think this is area-wide, and we heard this again and again from all the stakeholders, the public, town staff, is high-quality architecture, wanting to retain the really high quality look and feel of all the development in the corridor is really important. Also really important is to align with market supported opportunities based on the findings of the market analysis and the market as it moves forward, making sure that things that are developed are going to be successful because there is demand for those things. We heard a lot about support for small business, local business, encouraging opportunities for that type of development, access to nature and open space, connectivity and safety. We heard a lot about truck traffic and wanting to make sure that there is appropriate places for alternative transportation options through trails and things like that. Encourage fiscally net positive development, emphasis on high quality job creation, and to restrict drive-throughs was something that they wanted to not have in the corridor. So moving into some of the more area specific guiding principles, in the area of the Hartford and Griffin Office Park is to maintain corporate office feel and flex and light assembly, kind of limit the size of any future logistics or warehouse use to nothing greater than 50,000 square feet. And think about appropriately placed new residential, and we'll get into that, what that looks like or might mean in a little bit. Great Pond area, continuing to support that development with housing and additional mixed use retail. And then on any adjacent manufacturing parcels, maintain that as a future use. South side of Day Hill Road to focus on flex and industrial uses outside of recreation node and the hotel site. In Targeting Center, adaptive reuse of the office space, maybe possibly multifamily, and then potential down the road for retail along Bloomfield Avenue. And then on the hotel area, additional potential there for multifamily or assisted living. So again, these are just kind of thinking about what in the future we'd like to see in different areas of the corridor. So we also identified 3 focus areas or nodes within the study area to provide a little bit more. We did some mapping and to provide a little bit more direction on land use and things like that. So we identified Waterside Crossing, Goodwin Baker Hollow, and Voya Village. So the first one we'll talk about is Waterside Crossing. So the difference here is, or the recommendation here is to really think about the residential potential in this area. This is furthest away from 91, furthest away from the highway. So in terms of commercial and any type of manufacturing use, they want to be as close to the highway as possible. So that's part of the thinking here. It also abuts a lot of residential property and open space. There's also a lot of green space in the area already, so connecting into that, with adaptive reuse potential for, the Hartford itself. So now we'll talk about Goodwin Baker Hollow. We put the map in between all of these so we could refresh on where we're talking here. So zooming into this, the idea here is to focus on kind of a mixed use offering a variety of entertainment and recreation uses bookmarked by high quality industrial use.
Can I ask what those white blocks are?
The A by Goodwin Drive. What do you?
So the white blocks on this map are, they've been approved building sites through the Planning and Zoning Commission.
Right. And then Voya Village is the last one. And I should say too, these names are just placeholders right now. They might not ultimately be this, but we needed to call them something. So Voya Village just had a nice ring to it currently. So this one kind of has two potential scenarios. I think the first track being flex industrial, really high quality, think tech, high value, component type manufacturing might be ideal here. And that was kind of the original intention before the Voya was originally even built. This area could also be more commercial mixed use type of development. Again, these are long-term, long-range types of plans. So this one's up in the air a little bit, but you can see that there's a lot of development potential there. And based on kind of where the market goes and what the property owners end up wanting to do with the properties, that one could be kind of an either or scenario.
Is the yellow line to the left, is that Marshall Phelps?
Yes.
The left end of that?
Yep. And then adaptive reuse of the Voya and the other smaller buildings kind of at the southern part. All right. So we also have some recommendations that Tom will walk you through.
Yes, so these again apply kind of district-wide. These are kind of recommendations that are coming out of this study. And I'll talk about each of these. So the first bucket of recommendations is on land use and development specifically. So we've seen in the different focus areas that Krista walked through, encouraging mixed use development is going to be a big theme throughout. We've seen shifts in the market away from kind of more single use districts. And so, integrating residential, integrating retail, restaurant, medical office, hotels, recreation, all of those different uses into the district is the trend we're seeing and the trend that is following market conditions. So adjusting land use regulations to encourage this kind of mixed use development would be a core recommendation here. The second one is around limiting high volume distribution centers. This came through loud and clear in all of our stakeholder engagement that, while those large distribution centers are certainly providing jobs, generating tax revenue, they're really large and they generate a lot of truck traffic that can be, disruptive to some other uses in the district. So limiting large scale, high volume, more Amazons, more Targets, those kinds of things would be one of, a key recommendation as well. Third, support Great Pond Village development. As we know, there's already some apartment units there. There's the infrastructure in place for street infrastructure in place. And so there's a lot of planning has gone into that. And so encouraging the continual build out of Great Pond as kind of a retail mixed use district that was originally conceived as, we think makes sense and would be a great anchor for this district as it continues to evolve. And then fourth is facilitating the reuse of vacant office properties. We're seeing some interest from developers. No formal proposals received yet, but some interest, some discussions of wanting to convert some existing office properties, older properties that are unlikely to be used as office in the future for various uses, and largely residential, but could also be things like assisted living or medical office. Encouraging or having policies that allow for that to happen seamlessly in areas that make sense for it to happen is also a core recommendation.
Quick question, the back side of that property, do you have anything particular in mind for that?
Which property?
Sort of the north side of the Great Pond area.
Yeah, so I think that would continue to be industrial.
So the north part of the Great Pines is basically, or we're echoing here, it's a continuation of open space. So the back 200 acres or so.
I used to work on that site.
Yep. So ultimately, we're going to have connected open space that goes from Northwest Park through the old landfill, through Great Pond, through some deep open space land that they acquired for bird mitigation, and then onto the town of Bloomfield. So connected acreage all along the Farmington River.
Yeah, I mean, the other consideration for that space is I know it was a Superfund site that's been relatively cleaned up, but on the north end, I think that was not part of the Superfund site, and you may find some stuff back in the woods from 60 or 70 years ago.
It's all been analyzed and cleaned up to appropriate standards. The question for those on Zoom was about the Great Pond, the northern portion of it. So I answered about the open space. The last question was related to it one time being a contaminated site at Great Pond. All of the environmental studies and remediation have been done to the standards required by the state and federal government.
Second group of recommendations is around business growth and retention. So continuing business retention and expansion efforts. There are already a lot of great businesses in the park, a lot of great jobs, contributing employment opportunities to the town. Continuing to support those businesses, making sure they're getting what they need to stay. Anything that the town can do to make sure that their needs are being responded to so that we can retain them and encourage them to expand within the corridor. Along with that is attracting advanced manufacturing and industrial users. So we saw in some of the fiscal analysis that we looked at, the market analysis, there's a lot of potential for those kinds of uses, and they are great generators of revenue as well as employment opportunities for the community. So continuing to work with the state in attracting those users and providing making sure there are sites available for them to locate within Day Hill. Quality of life and infrastructure, enhancing green space and placemaking. One of the things that people really like about Day Hill Corridor is the green open space feel to it. So continuing to support that and make sure that development is kind of working harmoniously with the natural environment around it, and kind of going hand in hand with the next option, trails, walkability, connectivity, making that kind of quality of place really strong so that it is attractive to businesses, as well as the other types of uses we're talking about, residential, amenities, commercial, all of those things. Just kind of working to enhance that quality of place. The next one is around addressing truck parking challenges. This came up and has to do with kind of those higher volume warehouse developments, making sure that there's places for these vehicles to park so that they're not in the way of other amenities and they're kind of hidden away from the main corridor. And then the last group here is around branding and identity. This area has been referred to as the Day Hill corporate area. We're suggesting maybe considering a rebrand away from that corporate only image that served the area well in the past, you know, was attractive to kind of corporate office users as well as industrial users. But as we're thinking to kind of diversify a bit with, you know, recreation and restaurants and residential, maybe we think of a name that maybe doesn't stress corporate as strongly. I would certainly stick with Day Hill, but maybe it's something like, you know, Day Hill Landing or Day Hill Crossing or just the Day Hill Corridor, something like that, to de-emphasize the corporate only. And then the last one is beyond that kind of district-wide brand to develop distinct identities for these individual hubs that we've been talking about. Waterside Crossing, Great Pond, you know, the Boya area, maybe that has a different name. The recreation hub in the center with the Day Hill Dome, you know, we refer to it as Goodwin Baker Hollow, maybe, you know, a name that gets to that kind of mixed use recreational hub. And so kind of by emphasizing those different identities, that will kind of encourage businesses that fit with that feel for each of those identities to want to locate there. And be part of that ecosystem. So those are our recommendations, and I will kick it over to Patrick to talk about next steps.
Great, thanks, Tom. Thanks, Krista. So Tom and Krista are completing the formal aspect of the study. We're looking to finalize the report in the next week to 2 weeks. And we'll get that distributed. It'll be on the town's website. And then we go through a process of bringing this forward to the Planning and Zoning Commission. The Planning and Zoning Commission is the ones that are charged with land use decisions in the community. So we want to take the findings and recommendations from this study, present them to the Planning and Zoning Commission. We'll be working with Todd Seeley, the town planner, and the commission as to exactly how they want to have this study presented. Could be over 1 or 2 meetings with them to give them the background. They've allowed us to go forward, get all this community input, get the market analysis in place and then the matrix that they've come up with decision making. Now we bring it to the Planning and Zoning Commission for the next step. What then happens? So as you know, any kind of development, it takes both the private sector and what their desires are from the market, and then the public sector when it comes to infrastructure and our zoning regulations. And there's discussions that go back and forth relative to that. And there are different tools in the toolbox for zoning regulations. You could potentially have, for instance, density bonuses for affordable housing component if it was a mixed-use housing development. You could have more flexibility on the actual uses that are allowed on any particular parcel within the district or the mix of uses on those properties. There could be amendments related to the amount of parking that's required or other sort of site plan related topics. That could be specific text amendments to our zoning regulations. There's another tool that's called an overlay district. Here in Windsor, we call them design development districts. So you keep the underlying zone, but then you create an overlay on a portion of the property that says, in this particular location, we have a little bit more flexibility by way of uses, by way of densities, setbacks, those types of things. So that is a tool that we potentially can utilize. And then like Great Pond, we created a form-based code. Maybe there's a section or two along Day Hill that would lend themselves to that type of a zoning regimen. And then the financial tools. Often in development, there's a gap in the financing that somehow, some way, if you want that particular development to occur, sometimes the town does have to provide some form of incentive. So what could that look like? In various projects along the way that we've done here in Windsor, sometimes we've spent money on pre-development. So some architectural studies, some environmental studies, pro formas related to actual financing to help get set the stage for any particular development to occur. So that is one possibility. The town has a tax abatement policy. We may need to tweak the tax abatement policy to provide for, again, some of the uses that aren't spelled out today in our tax abatement policy, but maybe in the future. And that process would be through the Economic Development Commission, then on to the town council if we were to tweak our tax abatement policy. The town also recently created a tax increment financing policy. And that's another financial tool that could be used in various parts of the community. It may or may not be the type of a tool that we want to apply along Dayhill or portions thereof. And then we're always on the look for where can we leverage any state funding that could come into play. Right now, the state legislature is looking at the possibility of creating what they're calling a Grayfields Fund. And that's looking at underutilized commercial office space. And if there were to be a conversion, you potentially could go to the state and present your project and maybe get some funding that could be wrapped into that. So those are some of the tools that we will be exploring in the coming months. We have developer interest in various properties, some of which have already gone to the Planning and Zoning Commission on an informal basis. So we anticipate more of that back and forth discussions with the private sector and looking to move forward with projects along Dayhill Road. So I think, do we go into
Yep,
questions?
Q&A.
So we're gonna open it up to questions. Chris is gonna go around with a microphone. Because of the folks that are online, we really need you to present your question through Krista.
Here. I can just hold it.
Oh, okay. I have two questions. Can you go back to one of the slides that I think it was showing the 3 separate districts? And you said those white areas were already committed and passed by the planning and zoning. Yeah, those, what are those 3 areas that are going to be built?
Okay, so on Baker Hollow Road, can you use your, go over to D&E? D&E was Baker Hollow Road. These were flex distribution potential. It could be either manufacturing or a lower scale distribution uses. D is a 300,000 square foot building, and E is 120,000 square foot building approved, and we are anticipating in the coming months that construction on those 2 facilities will proceed. And then what's shown as A was an approved site plan for a company that was looking to locate right there, a manufacturer. And unfortunately, because of financing, they've stepped away. But we still think that that would be an ideal location for a manufacturing facility. So we wanted to show it, continue to show it in the plan, the study, to signal to the private sector that yes, indeed, we would love to see a manufacturing entity locate there. That'd be somewhere in the vicinity of 450 to 500,000 square feet of total development. One of the benefits of that particular property is it's really serviced by 2 roads, Goodwin Drive as well as Old Iron Ore Road. Yes.
Thank you for all that, but my questions were, which companies are going in there? Are they like Amazon or
So
high traffic?
So both D and E, those are what's called spec development. So they're being built and the developer is seeking the tenants for those spaces.
I see. And my second question was, what was the cost to taxpayers for this big study? What was the fee for that?
We allocated $95,000 to do the study.
Thank you.
Just on the matrix you had of all the. Right here, okay. My question is on the community preference column. Is that the preference, or is that what people want, or is it what people believe is feasible or practical? For example, it's moderate for manufacturing and flex industrial. It seems like that would probably rate higher if people are saying what they would want, I would think. But how did you divide?
Yeah, so clearly, right, it's not exact. This is based on kind of the sticky notes and the questions people had answered in the question, but the question was phrased, I think it was, which types of uses do you think are appropriate for the corridor, or something like that. So it's probably a combination of both things. Like some people might take in mind what they think is viable, others might just be kind of their reaction to seeing those sorts of things. So it wasn't an exact.
And can I follow up
Yeah.
on that, Tom? So it's not a perfect science. Again, this was some of the feedback that came forward in public input. However, they know I've already challenged them on that particular column. It itself, for instance, here it says warehouse distribution low. And I think what people were getting at there was the large high volume distribution. We're not intending to eliminate distribution in key areas in the Dayhill corridor that are smaller scale, not that high volume that requires a ton of truck traffic. There's other warehouse distribution uses that are much lower volume that the public wouldn't even know likely is really there. So I think some of this will be amended prior to the final report. And for instance, office community preference here says low. And I believe what I heard from the public was try to fill the space of the offices before building new office. It wasn't that they did not believe that an office use was appropriate in Dayhill. I think most folks in the community probably love the fact that we have these beautiful filled office spaces with high-paying jobs. So this is where we stand today. We are going to be tweaking sort of some of the nomenclature and some of the messaging that ultimately gets produced in the final report.
I'm curious why data centers show up as a low to moderate market potential. If you look worldwide, the demand for data centers is crazy at the moment. Several of the key factors are availability of power, cooling water, and network infrastructure. And all those are at least, reasonably good on the Dayhill, between the MDC water, the power is like okay in this area, and there's fiber optic connectivity a ring around Dayhill Road.
Yep. Yeah, it's a good question. Couple different things. One of the key factors for data center siting is also kind of the latency issue with data. So a lot of users of data centers need to be located relatively close to the data center. So that can vary by industry. For some industries like finance, really important to be minimal latency so that they can have super high connections. Other industries, it's not as critical, and we're talking about differences in milliseconds here too. So currently in this area, there isn't necessarily a huge demand from existing industries for data centers to be right here. Certainly data center demand, as you said, is up everywhere, but the data center could be somewhere else. For example, outside of DC in Northern Virginia, that's Data Center Alley. So that's one reason. Another reason is Connecticut has really high electricity costs. And so because they are such high power users, you wouldn't necessarily locate a data center in Connecticut unless the user was already in Connecticut and needed to be near a data center.
To follow up on Tom's point, we actually have data centers already existing in town.
Right.
And so there is still an opportunity, just because something said from a overall market standpoint, from, you know, the Connecticut or the data sources that they utilize, we may still have companies approach us that want to do a data center. We have Cygnus Data Center, Aetna has one located here, Verizon is looking to build an additional data center. So it does mean that there's no opportunity. It means comparative across the country where these very large data centers are locating themselves. But maybe we won't have one of those mega data centers, but an end user data center could quite possibly land here.
So some areas like Northern Virginia, you mentioned you're starting to see a lot of public pushback against additional data centers, right? As well as limitations on things like power. So that could, if you're thinking more than a year or two ahead, that could change.
Thank you. Could you bring back that slide, please, with the 3 zones you're interested in having developed? Yep. Waterside Crossing, is that that complex of offices? And were you thinking in terms of converting them to residential or tearing them down? Or what was the thought about that whole complex there?
Yep, so this is the map here. It's a fairly large area. It's a kind of a combination of those different things. The yellow areas are kind of being thought of as potential for residential. So in the case of this area here, number 5, these buildings, that would probably be more of a, you know, possibly a tear down or kind of reconfiguration of some way. Some of the other areas, you know, are parking lots where you could fit residential. 1 and 2 are vacant sites that could be residential, but it could be any number of configurations. And for, you know, number 4, those are existing buildings that might have some conversion potential without having to, you know, knock them down. But, you know, there's all kinds of possibilities. This isn't meant to be prescriptive. It's just kind of possible.
We do have some high quality office users currently in this area, and they have leases. We'd like that to continue. It's really for the buildings that are need a new use. What kind of flexibility would we potentially provide?
There are some offices that are still being occupied.
Yeah, 5 and 7 Waterside Crossing, for example, they have good occupancy. There's a building on the north side. Can get to this. Yep, that is currently occupied with like an engineering firm. So again, we want to sort of encourage the continuation of the high quality office space that's out there. But for those buildings that have been vacant, that the property owner determines that they want to potentially go in a different direction, could we potentially have assisted living? Could it be an educational facility? Could it be residential, senior living, all those type of things? And it's really going to depend a lot on these office space conversions, depend on what the floor plate of the building is. Not every office building lends itself to conversion to residential. So that again will be a sort of a back and forth with the private sector developers.
Okay, and my second question was, you mentioned that there would be a walking path. I wasn't kind of picturing where the beginning and end point of that was.
So you might be able to see on the map here, there is a green dash line that starts at the Hartford and wraps around, goes all the way down Dayhill Road to approximately Helmsford Way, I believe. And so that is already constructed, that a lot of folks are walking and biking on today. It's a separated bike trail, so it's not on Dayhill Road itself, which is critical. You know, it is off the road. It's a good 10 feet wide. It's a great amenity. And our hope would be that we'll continue to analyze the opportunity to extend that trail on further portions of Day Hill Road.
That would be great because I live off Prospect Hill Road and I would love to ride my bike on that trail, but I don't want to ride my bike on Prospect Hill because it's a very busy road. So that's why I put a sticky that it would be great if there could be a, you know, a sidewalk there eventually.
Smithfield.
Okay, thank you.
Yep, thank you.
There's something, yeah, this gentleman back here, Sam.
Yeah, what percentage of the Griffin of those offices are filled right now, including the Voya, the Hartford, and Griffin?
So throughout the whole corridor, we have currently about 31% vacancy. However, there's an additional statistic which basically says what space is available for like sale or lease, and that is 60%. So there's leases that are currently on the books, and when the folks come to sort of extend their lease, they may or may not stay in the same footprint. So it's sort of an evolving number, but that's where we stand today, 31% vacancy and 60% of the space is available to the market.
Any future prospects for the Voya building, the Hartford building? I know they're mostly empty right now, or Voya is totally empty.
So Voya still has some of the Voya employees at the Voya. Mostly doing remote in there some days. Then the Hartford does have some tenancy in there currently, maybe about 20 to 25% of the building is occupied. There is interest in the private sector in both properties. We haven't gotten to the level of knowing exactly what the use would be, but there are folks looking at both buildings.
So from a practical perspective, how many apartments could be built up there and actually be utilized? Is there, you might have mentioned that at the last meeting, I can't remember, but how many apartments would you think you'd have a market for up there?
Yeah, I think the market analysis, we were looking out 5 years. I believe it was like several hundred over the next 5 years. But you know, this is a very long-term plan that we're looking at here. So
But several hundred apartments, I'm assuming is pretty much one site. I mean, all that stuff that's in yellow could have
there's
thousands of apartments, right? But there's not enough of a market for that. So I'm also curious, so then there was that other thing that you had regarding retail and restaurants.
yeah.
So retail and restaurants, which has never worked up there, because there's not enough housing up there, so people go to the center of town, I guess. It seems to me like that would just compete against the center of town, which is something that the town of Windsor wouldn't really want. So to think that retail and restaurant would be a good use up there, I mean, also, I don't think that it's that practical. Is that a fair statement?
So the way I'll answer that is that in these corridors that are sort of mixed industrial, commercial office, there's a movement towards amenitizing those areas in order to make them attractive to employees to come to the office and come to the manufacturing plant, not working remotely. They do want to have some level of amenities. You know, I don't anticipate that the Day Hill corridor all of a sudden is going to become a big shopping center, but in various nodes where there could be a mixed use development that has a couple of restaurants or some local serving retail, does seem like it would fit.
And that's, I mean, I can tell you from experience, that's a bit of a challenge because everybody leaves there at 5 or 6 o'clock after work. And for restaurants to succeed there on lunch business has just not ever worked. So as nice as that would be, I don't think that's a practical use for that area.
There is the possibility, for instance, where Day Hill Dome and Fast Pitch Nation is located, maybe some additional commercial there, just because it is, you know, such a draw. Commercial and other aspects of the corridor will likely require the housing to get built first, and then maybe the retail would follow. That's how it traditionally, you gotta have rooftops, you have to have.
Absolutely. But that, I think the runway for that is beyond all of our lifespans, unfortunately. So yeah, so that's a problem.
I just want to add to your response just now, when the hotels are coming around Cahill Dome. So my question, and I'm sorry if I missed it as part of the original presentation, is about the time horizon. I appreciate what you mentioned about, you know, basically if we build it and they come, do they want retail, you know, or do we build retail first? So aren't we, you know, we're talking about maybe zoning changes in the next 2 years, but we're talking about maybe marketing and things in the next 4 years, but we're really talking about a concept for the next 30 years. So the number of residential units, for example, in this graphic, and whether there would be enough to support retail and whether it would compete with downtown, 30, 40, 50 years from now, Windsor might have a population of 49,000, and there might be a village, there might be a center here, kind of like Bishop's Corner in West Hartford, as an extreme example. But so how is that part of the study, the time horizon?
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly a good point. Our market analysis, it's very hard to predict the market more than 5 years out, right? So that's, our market analysis looked at 5 years, and then general trends that are likely to occur. What we want to do here is kind of shape the future of the uses that we do want to see, knowing that the market's going to have ups and downs and changes along the way. And, you know, it may make sense to target certain areas for development first, or, you know, focus on certain nodes that we do want to see concentrate development in certain areas. These are all decisions that the town's going to have to make, knowing what the market opportunities are. But certainly, you know, with 700 acres of buildable land, that's decades or plus of build out potential.
Let me follow up on that then. If you or I'm sure anyone of an equivalent company can't provide a market analysis with a horizon of longer than 5 years, what information or tools can you list for the town? What information or tools do we need to make decisions that will last 20 or 30 years?
Yeah, I mean, we know generally, right, the trajectory of these different markets. Office space is not going to come back the way that it was. To be able to project exactly how much office space is going to be needed beyond 5 years is anyone's guess. But we know generally these types of uses that we've identified have potential in the market, at least in the medium term. So that's kind of the way to think about it. I mean, you know, no one has a crystal ball, but as we're seeing these trends evolve in the market, this is the best we can do to plan for the future.
All right, so,
If folks online, are they able to ask questions or put something in the Q&A feature?
this is viewable only.
Viewable, okay.
So are you looking at any particular information to help guide where you think the immediate development opportunities are? Are you looking, for example, at the availability of sewer and water, existing power lines? I mean, are you, in terms of focusing on an area, are you suggesting that there are certain places that we should be working on?
So we did meet with the utility partners, and you know, so that represents water, sewer, the gas lines, and all of that, and the fiber optic infrastructure. So we met with all of those partners. They essentially come back to you and say, show us the development, and then we'll do our design and analysis at that point in time. That was the gist of the conversation. So we're gonna have to continue whenever we have a developer knocking on the door, immediately start those conversations with the utility partners.
So and listen, you guys have done a great job, but it seems to me that it's a real challenge, because to build apartments, if the market now could only justify whatever, 300 apartments, you still have a ton of land that is not really going to generate the tax revenues that you hope it's going to generate. And I'm assuming that the existing office buildings, it sounds like there's going to be a fair amount more vacancy over the next couple of years, right? Is that? Potentially. So what happens with those buildings as far as taxes go when they become vacant? Does the town do something with that? Do they assess them at a much lower rate immediately, or does it wait till the next reval?
So the commercial properties are based on the leases. That's how commercial office space is assessed. And what happens is we have the reval. And so each 5 years they'll reassess and come up with a number based on the information that's being provided to them. The property owner does have the opportunity to challenge our assessment.
But can they do that in the middle of reval times? Yeah.
And personal property would change. Personal property in the buildings, if the building is empty.
Oh, sure. You know, if the building is empty, there's no personal property for us to essentially be taxing.
Right, but it's fair to expect that real property will probably decline also at that point. Right. Thank you.
If I think I heard correctly about the northern part of the whole Day Hill corporate area, as it's currently called, is this connection between the Northwest Park all the way along the southern bank of the Farmington River. So that's really cool. And then using some of the old landfill land. When does the rezoning, when you approach the zoning board, that's where like such things would be implemented? They'd rezone it to like NZ, non-zonable, and then, or non-zoned, and then when the new map comes out, we would see the extent of what that is.
That's correct.
If this map were being drawn a couple years in the future after that step, would it still be considered part of the Day Hill corporate area, or would it be moved out of it at that point because it's no longer developable?
I would see it as, Rob, as an amenity. For instance, the folks that are living in Great Ponds.
Yeah.
Or in any of the neighborhoods on the north or south that are relatively close. That whole area of open space is something that they can take advantage of and enjoy.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. Seeing no more questions, thank you, everyone, here at Town Hall as well as online. As I said, we'll be wrapping up the final report in the coming days, and we'll get that distributed on our website. We have been recording this, and it will be put on the town's website as well.
Patrick, could you take questions and via email from those folks that are online?
We have been asked whether or not we could take questions via email, and I think that would be fine. If you want to send me an email to, it's McMahon, MCMAHON @townofwindsorct.com. McMahon @townofwindsorct.com. We'll give it just a minute or two here, see what comes in. There is a email here about Bloomfield Avenue and truck traffic related to Bloomfield Avenue. So exit 37 So that's where, Targeting Center, and the gas station, then, exit 37 going out towards Bloomfield itself. It's a state route. So, ultimately, they're the ultimate decision maker, relative, to that route. Years ago, we did, working with CROG, do a corridor sort of analysis. We'll continue to look at that as opportunities to, we know that there's pass-through traffic. We know that trucks are utilizing that to get from the highway to the, more so the businesses that are on the Bloomfield side of things. And so that's a challenge. We can't necessarily restrict the business development, of our neighboring community. So, but whatever other sort of, steps we could take to, help maybe slow down the trucks or the traffic along the way. We'll be looking at that going forward.
So we've lived on Bloomfield Avenue for over 30 years, and we've seen a really significant increase in the traffic, especially with the over into Bloomfield, but also up into Day Hill Road. Because exit 38 is such a hot mess, you see a lot of traffic every morning that comes off Bloomfield Avenue and then, typically goes up to Day Hill. So one thing that would be helpful, I don't know if the town can do, the traffic lights are not particularly synchronized. Especially at rush hour, it's very difficult to turn out of a house or a business that's in the Bloomfield Avenue corridor. If there's any way that could be synchronized to create little breaks, that would be immediately helpful.
Thanks for your comment. I have a question here about the sequencing, the fact that this whole endeavor was done slightly separate on a separate track from our plan of conservation and development update. So every community in the state of Connecticut has to update their plan of conservation and development, POCD for short, every 10 years. Our current POCD was completed in 2015, so we are due to have an update this year. We've hired a consulting firm, FHI. I'm not sure exactly what they're named again, but that 10-year process or update we are currently doing. What we wanted is, because we had this private sector interest, and we wanted to be responsive to the private sector in a quicker time frame. That's why we've separated it out, the Day Hill corridor itself. Ultimately, some of the findings and recommendations will be brought into the POCD. The soonest the workshops will start in the zoning regulations change. Ultimately, that will be a conversation with Todd Seeley, the town planner, and the Planning and Zoning Commission. We expedited this study for a reason. We don't want to, hold up private sector reaching out to us about potential zoning text amendments or overlay district. We want to keep those in process, but at the same time have enough information to provide the Planning and Zoning Commission some criteria by which they can make some decisions before the POCD is finalized. And that's all we have from online. So thank you everyone for attending. We really